What's your assessment then, firstly, of what has happened overnight local time?
Thanks for having me, Becky. So this is certainly another cycle of escalation after a period of certain calm, at least between Iran and the US, with the ceasefire being messy and chaotic, but somewhat standing. And I think this is two things are happening. One is Tehran is drawing a very clear red line, essentially saying that they're serious about folding Hezbollah and Lebanon into that final peace process or the peace deal, as they had said from the beginning. They want this to be regional, and that very much includes their allies. And they had been tolerating Israeli attacks in southern Lebanon, the back and forth, but they draw the red line at attacks on Beirut. Earlier this week, we heard reporting that Israel was getting ready to attack Dahia. The Iranians sent a serious warning to the US, and then President Trump presumably stopped that attack. And then came the attack on Sunday night. And then the Iranians, I think, are drawing that red line with their attacks on Israel. And now Israel has decided to retaliate. And that's the second part I wanted to talk about, because just hours ago, we heard from President Trump talking to the media saying, I'm the one calling the shots and it's not Israel. Potentially, he's going to ask them to not attack Iran and just de-escalate from here. So I think there's also probably some pushing of the envelope or testing the water from the Israeli side to see how much they can escalate and how much they can get away with as far as attacks on Beirut, more on Hezbollah, and potentially even engaging with Iran. But this is a risk for more escalation for sure.
So, yeah, so I think what's important at this stage is to nail whether or not, and this you're well sourced on this, whether or not we are in the final throes here of sort of tit for tat escalation, call it what you will, before a deal described by Donald Trump as a good deal. He says he's in the final stretch of nailing that. Is he?
Well, I think this in itself is an indication that maybe that, because we know the diplomatic process is also moving in parallel and Donald Trump wants to exit the war. It's not very clear if he wants to make enough concessions that are needed for a deal. Does he want a deal? Yes. Does he want a good deal? Yes. He wants to exit the war. He's done with this war. But at the same time, I just am not sure if the president is prepared to make enough concessions. And one of them is this Iranian red line, wanting to bring Hezbollah and Lebanon into that peace process. And the Iranians are essentially signaling that they're very serious about that. And this is one thing that the US has to accept as part of that. But we know that that diplomatic path has been ongoing in parallel. The Pakistani mediator has been very active. Other regional powers have been pushing for an end to the war. And this is also a pattern we've seen in the past. If the Israelis are not very happy with that whole peace process or with the potential deal, this is also their way of trying to sort of get in or sabotage or torpedo the process, or also see a window of opportunity closing fast and try to seize that before that opportunity ends. It's a little bit of, I think, all of these. But at the end of the day, I think Iran and the US are interested in that diplomatic process, but each of them wants to exit the war on their own terms. And they're still sort of drawing that those red lines. And of course, Israel is a very important component here. It won't happen without the US bringing Israel into that process or putting enough pressure.
And Negar, Donald Trump may very well be done with this war. We have a World Cup starting this Thursday. It's his birthday the week after. There's a big UFC fight the week after that. There is the 250th anniversary of US independence on July the 4th. For some time, it seems like the sequencing has been such that Donald Trump, could do without this war, ahead of all of these important dates as far as he is concerned. So he may be done with the war. Most experts suggest Benjamin Netanyahu needs this to continue as much for domestic political purposes as anything else. What's your sense of where the decision makers in Iran, whoever they are, and let's talk about who they are, Negar, what's your sense of where they are at with regard, the sequencing of the end of this, if that is where we are at this point?
You're absolutely correct, Becky. Donald Trump, like I said, and you explained, is done with this war. Add to that the global energy crisis, which is showing very much here at the pump in the US. The summer months coming. This is putting pressure on the whole world, in the US, in Europe, among your US allies in Asia. And the Iranians are observing that very, very closely. But at the same time, there's an understanding in Tehran that if the status quo continues, sort of a no war, no peace situation, the continuation of a messy ceasefire with more attacks on their allies in Lebanon, but also no direct conflict with the US, that this may be something that President Trump can tolerate for a little more. He doesn't want conflict to resume. This is the understanding in Tehran. And so Tehran is also having a little bit of a risk, a calculated risk here that, okay, if they increase the pain, it may actually push Donald Trump to move more seriously and faster towards a peace process. Because if he does pass, in fact, the summertime and all of those events that you mentioned, and the market starts to stabilize, then the status quo may actually be to the detriment of the Iranian side as far as what they can get out of a peace process. So the longer it goes, it may actually not work to their benefit. That's why they're taking this risk to sort of increase the pain.
Nega, always good to have you. The escalation, it will not surprise you, weighing heavily on the financial markets today. Let's bring up oil. Brent crude trading more than 4.5% higher. That's the global benchmark index, of course, at 97.42. WTI, that's the US benchmark, trading just below 4.5% higher. The Asian markets are down on the back of this escalation overnight, Middle East time. All of those markets lower that we are covering here. The Kospi in South Korea, the Seoul market there, down more than 6%. The US futures market looks like this. We may assume for that to look quite different as we truck towards the opening of those markets on Monday. We'll keep a keen eye on those US market futures, an indication of how US stock markets will open some hours from now. Stay with CNN. More on our breaking news coverage after this.